I didn't know when it started, the little jolt that ran through me every time she appeared. Maybe it was the first time she leaned across the counter at the repair shop, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something like warm leather and vanilla. I remember freezing because she didn't notice, or maybe she did, and just let me. She walked in like she owned the quiet, dusty space, her heels clicking softly on the concrete floor, and I realized I had been staring. Mid-40s, confident, sharp in a way that made my 20-something self feel both clumsy and unworthy. But there was something in the tilt of her head when she looked at me. Curiosity mixed with amusement, like she already knew what I hadn't yet admitted to myself. "You've been thinking about me, haven't you?" she whispered that first time, leaning just close enough for the words to skim my ear. My stomach tightened and my hands, holding a wrench I wasn't really using, betrayed me with a sudden shake. I wanted to say something, anything, but I could only manage a breathless, maybe. It wasn't flirtation exactly. Or maybe it was, but subtle, threaded with something I couldn't name yet. There was a softness in her voice, though, that undercut the challenge, as if she were testing the water and inviting me in without saying so. I remember watching her adjust the sleeve of her coat, the way her fingers lingered on the fabric like it was a private thought she didn't intend to share. I wanted to reach out, to touch it, but I didn't. Instead, I handed her the paperwork she'd been fumbling with, and she smiled, the kind of smile that lingers in your chest after it's gone. We stood there for a beat longer than necessary, and it hit me how intensely aware I was of the space between us, the counter separating our worlds, the subtle brush of air when she shifted, the hum of the fluorescent lights that seemed to underline every heartbeat. She glanced at me, and I swear, just for a moment, the room narrowed to her eyes, that knowing look, and me, trying to appear casual but failing spectacularly. Later, I caught myself replaying the moment in my head, over and over. The soft rise of her eyebrow when I hesitated. The way her lips parted slightly, like she was holding back something. A laugh, a secret, or maybe a confession. I couldn't stop thinking about it, even as I went through the motions of my day, even as the smell of engine oil and coffee mingled around me. It was ridiculous. I knew that. She could never notice me like that. And yet, every time she returned, even just to drop off a package or glance at a receipt, my pulse hit a little faster, my hands clumsy again. There was something unspoken between us, fragile and electric, like a string stretched too tight, ready to vibrate at the slightest touch. That night, I lay awake thinking about it, the whisper still in my ear, the heat of it lingering long after she'd gone. How could a simple question, spoken softly, casually, send my thoughts spinning for hours? How could someone so untouchable feel so close? I knew, in the pit of my stomach, that whatever this was, whatever she was, it wasn't going to be simple. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly why I couldn't stop thinking about her. I wasn't sure why she came back that afternoon, carrying a folder thicker than she looked capable of handling. The repair shop smelled faintly of motor oil and paper, sunlight cutting across the dust in streaks that made everything feel suspended, fragile. She leaned against the counter, eyes scanning the list of parts I prepared, but she didn't speak right away. "Could you help me sort this?" Her voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant, like she wasn't used to asking for help. I nodded, stepping closer, though I reminded myself silently to stay professional. My fingers brushed hers briefly as I took the folder. She didn't flinch, but I caught the subtle stiffening of her shoulders, a quiet barrier she didn't quite lower. As we sorted the papers, I noticed how tired she looked, the faint shadows under her eyes, the tiny crease at the corner of her mouth that appeared whenever she concentrated. Her hands were elegant, long fingers folding sheets carefully, but there was a weariness to the movement, the way she pressed the papers together almost too hard. "You don't get much rest, do you?" I asked softly, unsure if I should. Her eyes flicked up at me, brief and guarded, like she considered whether to answer. Then she let out a short laugh, not quite genuine, more shield. "You could say that," she murmured, returning her gaze to the folder. There was something in the way she said it, a quiet vulnerability hiding beneath the control that made me want to reach across the counter and ease it, though I didn't. We worked in silence for a while, the only sound the rustle of paper and the low hum of the fluorescent lights. I noticed the way her hair fell forward as she leaned over the documents, brushing her cheek, a strand catching the sunlight, golden against the brown. I wanted to comment on it, tease her somehow, but I held back. That hesitation, not knowing whether I could without crossing some invisible line, made my heart beat a little faster. At one point, she straightened, glanced at me, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes seemed to search mine for something. Recognition? Understanding? I couldn't tell. Then she smiled, faint, fleeting, and turned back to the papers. We finished sorting, and I handed the folder back. Our fingers met again, just for a heartbeat, and the world felt absurdly heavy, charged in that silent, impossible way. She hesitated, letting the contact linger a moment longer than necessary, then withdrew, brushing her hand along the folder instead of mine. I wanted to ask her something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I said quietly, "I'll have it ready by tomorrow." She nodded, a flicker of something unspoken passing through her gaze. And then, just as she turned to leave, she paused. The sunlight caught her profile, warm and sharp all at once. She glanced back over her shoulder, and I swear I could feel the weight of her attention, gentle, deliberate, like a hand on my chest without touching me. Her coat swirled around her as she stepped out into the fading afternoon, and I stayed frozen by the counter, heart still thrumming. That pause, that glance, that small, charged hesitation. It followed me long after the door closed, making the air feel electric and dangerous in the quiet aftermath. The rain started as a drizzle, turning the city streets into slick mirrors by the time she and I ended up in the tiny diner near the station. I hadn't planned to be here with her, not like this, sharing a late night, warm coffee between us while the rest of the world blurred in the downpour. But there she was, sitting across from me, coat still damp, hair curling around her face in soft, rebellious strands. We'd been quiet for most of the meal, exchanging glances more than words. There was a rhythm to it, like a conversation in some language only we could understand, an almost secret tether stretching across the table. I noticed her fingers tapping lightly against the mug, the way her knuckles whitened as she gripped it, and I felt my own hands tighten against mine, like I wanted to reach across and steady her, but didn't. I didn't mean to drag you into all this, she said finally, voice low. Her eyes avoided mine, staring at some imperceptible point just beyond the window. Into what? I asked, though I already had a sense. She'd been dealing with something messy, something that made her laugh a little too quickly at my jokes, and sigh a little too often when she thought I wasn't looking. "Though whatever this is between us," she murmured. Her gaze flicked up, caught mine for a heartbeat, and then darted away. That flicker, the sudden vulnerability, almost broke something inside me. I wanted to tell her everything, that I noticed her tired smiles, her hesitant glances, the way she lingered in the doorway before leaving, but the words caught in my throat. There was a moment, brief and ridiculous, where our knees brushed under the table. I felt the jolt, the tension coiling tighter in my chest. I wanted to lean in, to reach for her hand, to close the gap that shouldn't exist. My mind screamed at me to stop, but my body betrayed me with every small tremor and twitch. Then, her phone buzzed on the table, loud against the quiet din. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and pulled it to her lap. A name flashed, someone from the past, someone I wasn't meant to compete with or even see in this vulnerable moment. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the call, and I realized the world outside this little bubble was insisting itself back in. I swallowed hard, forcing my hands to remain still, my voice steady, though every nerve ending felt alive. "It's okay," I said quietly, more to convince myself than her. She nodded, letting the phone vibrate silently, and the proximity between us tightened. I could feel the warmth of her leg near mine, the faint scent of her coat, the quiet rise and fall of her breath. And I knew, in some reckless corner of my mind, that if she leaned in, just slightly, I wouldn't pull back. But she didn't. She smiled faintly, almost apologetically, and straightened in her chair. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, heart pounding, aware that whatever almost happened would linger in my chest long after the rain stopped. We left the diner side by side, umbrellas barely touching, the air between us heavy with words unspoken. That near moment, fragile, electric, terrifying, stayed with me, humming under my skin like a song I couldn't name. We were in the back room of the shop, sorting through old orders, fluorescent lights humming above us. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, staring at a stack of invoices like they might hold some secret answer. I wanted to say something, anything, but every time I opened my mouth, it felt like the words would shatter the fragile equilibrium between us. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything she hadn't said before. Do you ever wonder what we're doing? I froze, the question hitting harder than anything I'd expected. I wanted to deflect, to laugh it off, but there was no escape. Her eyes held me, steady and unyielding, a storm of curiosity, fear, and something else I couldn't name. I think about it, I admitted finally, keeping my gaze on the paperwork because looking at her felt too dangerous. More than I should. She shifted, letting out a long sigh, and for a moment, the shop felt impossibly small. The space between us was electric, heavy with every unspoken thought. Her hands twitched at her sides, then folded over the edge of the counter. I noticed the faint tremor, the small way her shoulders tensed, the tiny bite of her lip that betrayed some inner struggle she refused to voice. You're not supposed to, she said finally, almost to herself. Then, more sharply, I'm not supposed to either. We stood like that, words hanging in the air, each syllable weighted with guilt, curiosity, and the slow burn of something neither of us wanted to name yet. I watched her, memorizing the way the light hit her face, the soft shadow under her eyes, the way her jaw tightened whenever she tried to regain control. I wanted to reach for her, to close the distance that shouldn't exist. But I didn't. Not yet. The room was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint creak of the floorboards under our feet. Every glance, every pause, every hesitant exhale spoke louder than the words we couldn't say. Why do we keep doing this? She asked, voice barely audible, but it cut through me. Not the proximity, not the tension, but the raw honesty behind it. Her vulnerability was startling, fragile. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, that I felt it too, but I swallowed the words, afraid they'd make everything real in a way we weren't ready for. We looked at each other then, finally. No papers, no distractions. Just the quiet intensity of two people who had danced around something impossible for far too long. Every unspoken thought, every restrained breath, every small hesitation hung between us like a charged wire. Then she whispered, softer than anything else, and my chest tightened with a strange ache. I don't think I can pretend anymore. I stayed silent, because any response might shatter the delicate, terrible, beautiful thing we were teetering on. And in that pause, I understood, nothing would ever be the same after this. She had gone quiet for most of the afternoon, and I assumed she was lost in her usual careful control, filing invoices, checking orders. But then she stopped, fingers lingering on a stack of papers, and her hands shook ever so slightly. I watched, hesitated, unsure if I should speak. I haven't told anyone this, she murmured, almost to herself. Her voice was low, brittle in a way I'd never heard. Not even him. Not for years. I froze, the words hanging in the air like fragile glass. She glanced at me, eyes wide, unguarded, a rare crack in her usual armor. I lost someone, she continued. Someone I shouldn't have let go. And somehow, I've carried it with me. All the choices I made since, every step I thought I controlled, it's all shaped by that. I wanted to reach across the counter, to offer comfort, but I kept my hands still. Instead, I leaned just slightly closer, silently telling her it was okay to let the words fall, to let the weight be shared. You carry ghosts like that? I said softly, trying to thread myself into her vulnerability without overstepping. It makes sense, you're not hiding from me. You're hiding from what it hurts to remember. She exhaled, small, almost a laugh, but sad. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just afraid someone will see it and think I'm weak. And you? Her gaze flicked to mine, and I felt the tremor of that word. You. As if I were suddenly the reason her walls wavered. Then she pulled a small envelope from the folder she'd brought earlier, hesitating before placing it on the counter. I found this last night, a letter I never sent. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe I wanted someone to read it. Maybe I didn't. But I can't stop thinking about it now. I opened it carefully, the paper brittle, the handwriting familiar yet distant. The words inside weren't dramatic, just raw, unfiltered emotion. A heartbreak she'd buried so long ago, it almost felt like fiction. And yet, reading it, I felt a strange intimacy, like I was holding a part of her she hadn't let anyone else touch. She watched me, silent, her chest rising slowly, eyes darting away when I glanced up, then back again, holding my gaze with something like hope, fear, and unspoken longing all at once. I didn't expect anyone to ever read it, she admitted softly. Not really. I'm glad I did, I said honestly, though my throat felt tight. It helps me understand you. Why you are who you are. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She leaned back, letting the silence stretch, but the air between us had shifted, heavier, warmer, charged in ways neither of us could name. I noticed her hands again, resting lightly on the envelope, hesitant to let go. And in that pause, in that fragile, seismic quiet, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. Whatever this was between us, it had just grown deeper, and neither of us would be able to ignore it anymore. Her eyes met mine once more, soft, vulnerable. I don't know how to not feel this. I didn't answer. I just stayed there, feeling the ground shift beneath us, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. The shop was quiet that evening, the hum of the fluorescent lights softer than usual, the smell of old paper and motor oil oddly comforting. She was there, sorting through another folder, but this time she didn't flinch when I moved closer. I could see the faint lines of fatigue on her face, the same ones I'd noticed weeks ago, but now softened by something else. Ease, maybe, or trust. We didn't speak for a while. I watched her, memorizing the small gestures that had become familiar. The way her fingers lingered on the edges of the papers, the slight tilt of her head when she thought she was focused but wasn't, the subtle way she exhaled when she realized I was looking. Finally, she spoke, low, steady. I can't pretend anymore, she said. Not like the first time. There was no fear now, just quiet acknowledgement. This, whatever this is, it's here. And we can't ignore it. I nodded, carefully, deliberately. We don't have to pretend, I said, voice soft, almost reverent. It wasn't a declaration, not really. It was acknowledgement, recognition, and that was enough. She looked up at me, eyes lingering, searching for reassurance. I didn't offer grand words. I didn't need to. Instead, I moved just close enough to let the tension between us settle into something tangible. My fingers brushed hers as I handed her a pen, and we both froze. A small, simple contact, but it held the weight of weeks of restrained longing, of glances and pauses and quiet desperation. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. We sat together at the counter, papers forgotten, just existing in the same space. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the faint scent of her coat, the softness of her breath as she exhaled near me. I wanted to reach for more, but I didn't. I let this quiet, deliberate nearness, say what words never could. For the first time, it didn't feel impossible. It didn't feel like danger or guilt or unspoken rules. It felt inevitable, earned through the stolen moments, the silent glances, the vulnerability she had allowed me to witness. She leaned slightly closer, almost imperceptibly, and I mirrored her just a fraction. My fingers brushed hers again, resting lightly on the counter. I didn't speak, didn't even look away. The air between us hummed softly, carrying all the things we hadn't said, all the moments that had brought us here. And then she let out a small, almost inaudible sigh, the tension leaving her shoulders. I felt mine release at the same time. We didn't need words to understand. We just existed together in that quiet, shared space, the kind of intimacy that doesn't demand labels, that doesn't rush to a conclusion. I leaned back just slightly, letting her do the same. Our hands lingered near each other, touching now and then, a silent promise of presence, of awareness. Not love declared, not hearts on fire, just acknowledgement, fragile and steadfast, earned through patience and quiet persistence. We stayed like that for a while, side by side, the world outside fading, the rain that had once seemed so urgent now just a background hum. I realized, with a gentle ache, that this was enough. That somehow, after all the pauses and near misses, the whispered questions and secret letters, it had brought us here, not shouting, not desperate, but steady, quiet, and whole. And I knew, finally, that nothing would ever undo it. Looking back now, I can barely remember the exact moment when the tension between us shifted into something undeniable. It wasn't a single spark, or a dramatic confession, or some cinematic gesture. It was smaller than that. A glance held a second too long, a hand brushing mine over a folder, a shared silence that spoke louder than anything we'd ever said. I've changed in ways I didn't notice at first. I've learned patience, the kind that doesn't scream for attention, the kind that waits for trust to build itself naturally. I've learned how to see someone fully, not just who they appear to be, but the shadows they carry, the quiet victories, the moments they let slip by without fanfare. And I've learned that desire isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet, persistent gravity, pulling you closer without words. She's changed, too. I can see it in her now, the ease in her smile, the way her eyes soften when she thinks no one is watching. The careful walls she kept around herself have cracks, not destructive ones, but openings she lets me into, gently, one moment at a time. She carries her past heartbreaks differently now, less as chains and more as lessons, and somehow that makes her lighter, even though the weight of everything she's lived through is still there, invisible but present. What's remarkable is how ordinary it all feels. Not like a storybook romance or a fleeting fling, but like life itself. Messy, unpredictable, full of pauses and unspoken thoughts, but also full of those fleeting moments of intimacy that leave your chest tight with quiet satisfaction. We've learned to navigate that together, without needing labels, without rushing. Just noticing, just existing side by side. I still remember the small details that brought me to this understanding. The way her hand rested lightly on mine, the tilt of her head when she laughed softly, the way she let me sit with her in silence without feeling awkward. Those tiny, ordinary gestures carry a weight I hadn't anticipated, and I find myself replaying them even now, months later, like a favorite melody. I've also learned that love isn't always about declarations or fireworks. Sometimes it's about presence, about noticing someone in all their contradictions and quiet victories, and allowing yourself to be noticed in return. About staying close even when the world suggests distance. About finding joy in the slow, deliberate rhythm of shared moments, the kind that linger long after the noise fades. We've learned, I think, that intimacy doesn't need to announce itself to matter. That vulnerability isn't a weakness, but a kind of strength that draws people together. That careful, patient attention can be more profound than grand gestures. And now, when I think of her, it's with warmth, a quiet smile, a gentle ache that feels like home. Our story isn't over, but the hardest part, the waiting, the uncertainty, the near misses, is behind us. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?